For as long as I can remember, I was the responsible one, the family's invisible fixer. I've spent my entire adult life weaving myself into the fabric of my family's chaos, silently patching holes and smoothing frayed edges no one else bothered to notice. At 45, I'm a high school guidance counselor, spending my days guiding teenagers through their struggles. Yet when I come home, I'm met with an emptiness that feels heavier than any burden at school. My family's dynamic has always been this way. I'm the forgotten daughter, overshadowed by Sarah, my younger sister, the pretty one, the shining star in our mother's eyes. Mom, Samantha, the matriarch, demands constant praise and attention, a spotlight that always seems to fall on Sarah, no matter what I do. I've paid for Sarah's college tuition, $75,000 over 4 years, and stepped in whenever the household finances faltered, covering expenses during family crises that no one else wanted to face. My contributions drift unnoticed, like whispers lost in a noisy room. Samantha's voice rings loudest in every gathering, twisting family achievements to favor Sarah. It's exhausting, but even more than that, it's painful. The subtle ways she steals the credit, the way she wields guilt like a weapon, keeps me locked in place, silent, yielding. Yet beneath the surface, I hold a secret power she doesn't know about: meticulous records, spreadsheets, emails, proof of every sacrifice, every dollar lent, every favor unreturned. As the family wedding approaches, I sense something's off. Samantha's simmering disdain is a looming storm, and I can feel the tension crackling in the air like static before a flash of lightning. But this time, I'm not turning away. I've been the family ATM, the emotional punching bag, for too long. But I'm not invisible anymore. Not to myself. The roots of this dysfunction stretch deep, tangled in memories I tried to bury. I remember my 16th birthday party like it was yesterday, the day the pattern cemented itself inside me. The house was crowded with relatives, the air thick with the scent of cake and fading candles. Samantha stood center stage, showering Sarah with praise for her beauty and popularity, her voice a loud echo that filled the room. Then she turned to me, her smile thin and patronizing. "You're the smart one, dear," she said, "but don't expect anyone to notice." Those words landed like a cold slap. I swallowed the sting, forcing a smile as I watched Sarah receive a $1,200 designer handbag and front-row tickets to a concert she'd dreamed about for months. Meanwhile, my own achievements, graduating top of my class, earning scholarships, were met with a shrug or a distracted nod at best. The comparison burned quietly inside me, but I convinced myself it was worth it if it kept the peace. I was the responsible daughter, the one who had to sacrifice for the family's image, the one who had to be strong so the rest could shine. Samantha orchestrated this unbalanced dance, favoring Sarah like a conductor with her favorite soloist, while I played the background notes no one heard. As I moved into adulthood, the sacrifices only grew heavier. I remember sending Sarah $20,000 for an internship in New York, a dream opportunity she couldn't have reached without me. I covered her rent, her groceries, her nights out, sending $2,000 a month to keep her afloat while she chased a glamorous life I could only watch from afar. When the family plunged into financial crisis, I was the one who stepped up again, loaning $50,000 to pay off debts no one else dared to touch. Meanwhile, I passed on professional promotions to care for our aging grandparents, sidelining my own career ambitions so someone else could handle the complications. Michael, my husband, watches all this with quiet concern. He's my anchor, the one who sees Samantha's manipulations clearly and urges me to protect myself. But despite the pain, I cling to hope that family harmony is possible, that if I keep giving, keep sacrificing, maybe someday they'll see me. My secret power remains tucked away. Detailed spreadsheets, bank statements, email chains documenting every transfer, every unacknowledged favor. Sarah, oblivious to the weight I carry, often remarks casually, "Skylar's always doing everything, like it's just a fact of life." Meanwhile, Samantha pulls the strings, demanding praise and redirecting credit to Sarah, deepening my invisibility with every calculated word. The first public humiliation hit me like a punch to the gut, sharp and unrelenting. It was my graduation ceremony for a professional certification I'd worked tirelessly to earn. The room was filled with family, friends, and colleagues, a moment meant to celebrate my growth and hard work. But Samantha had other plans. As I stood accepting my certificate, she loudly announced, "Well, we all knew Sarah was the pretty one, but at least this one found something useful to do." The room fell into an awkward silence. Eyes darted uncomfortably between us. I felt a sharp sting crawl up my spine, but I forced a polite smile, swallowing the hurt. Michael squeezed my hand, whispering, "Ignore her." I told myself it was jealousy, that her cruel words were born from insecurity, but the seed of doubt took root that day. My accomplishment, something I'd poured my soul into, was minimized and dismissed in front of everyone. The humiliation was raw and exposed, made worse by the presence of extended family and work colleagues. Inside, I battled the urge to respond, to defend myself, but fear held me back. I didn't want to escalate the conflict. Instead, I swallowed the pain, held my breath, and buried the feeling deep inside, telling myself I deserved better, but I buried that feeling. The moment I dared to push back, the ground beneath me shifted faster than I could keep up. Samantha's eyes, once merely cold, now burned with calculated fury. I thought my quiet resistance, subtle refusals, holding my ground in small ways, would be met with silence or begrudging respect. Instead, it unleashed a storm I hadn't been prepared for. Overnight, whispers began to snake through our extended family circle. Old friends, distant cousins, even long-forgotten neighbors started casting sideways glances, their voices carrying a different tone when I entered the room. "Skylar's always been difficult," I overheard at one gathering. "She's so ungrateful after everything Mom's done." The words stung because they twisted everything I'd sacrificed into something selfish and controlling. Samantha's mastery of manipulation was terrifyingly precise. She didn't confront me directly, but instead pulled strings behind the scenes, weaving a web of doubt and suspicion around me. She painted herself as the martyr, the woman who had given everything for her family, and was now being punished by her own daughter's ingratitude. "I only ever wanted what was best for both my girls," she said with wide, innocent eyes in front of the family, but the undercurrent was clear. I was the villain. She enlisted flying monkeys, family friends who once smiled warmly, but now questioned my motives with subtle digs and pointed questions. At a casual brunch, one aunt sighed loud enough for me to hear, "You know, sometimes I wonder if Skylar's generosity is just a way to control everyone." The venom was almost invisible, but it settled deep in my chest like a cold stone. The worst came during a family dinner, a rare occasion where I thought we might find some fragile peace. Samantha cornered Michael with a venom that surprised me. "You're undermining everything we've built," she accused, her voice dripping with faux hurt. "Trying to turn this family against me." I opened my mouth to defend us, to say that Michael and I only wanted fairness and acknowledgement, but my words faltered under the weight of doubt cast by my own family's gaze. Eyes shifted away, conversations hushed, and I felt the familiar isolation creeping back. I realized then that Samantha didn't just want to win arguments. She wanted to erase me. Despite the ache and mounting isolation, I clung to the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I could still bridge the gap. I requested a family mediation session, inviting a well-respected family friend to help us air grievances and seek understanding. I came prepared, armed with spreadsheets, bank statements, emails, irrefutable proof of the sacrifices I'd made. Sitting across from Samantha, I spoke calmly, carefully choosing words that sought to heal rather than accuse. "I want us to acknowledge what everyone has done for each other," I said, my voice steady despite the flutter of nerves. But Samantha's response was swift and merciless. "After all I've given you," she hissed, eyes flashing. "You question my love?" The guilt was weaponized with expert precision, slamming into me like a physical blow. The mediator, though well-meaning, seemed caught in the crossfire, unable or unwilling to cut through Samantha's manipulation. The room grew thick with tension, and Sarah sat silently, her eyes fixed on the table, caught somewhere between loyalty to mother and discomfort with the truth unraveling before her. Samantha's narrative dominated, painting me as the troublemaker, the daughter who couldn't accept her place in the family hierarchy. I left the session bruised, not physically, but in every vulnerable corner of my heart. The hope I'd held flickered, but didn't yet extinguish. I told myself the truth might still be the salve, even if it was buried beneath layers of denial and manipulation. Then came Sarah's wedding, the event that was supposed to be a celebration of love and new beginnings. Instead, it became the stage for one of the cruelest humiliations I've endured. The grand ballroom glittered with chandeliers casting soft light over hundreds of guests, laughter mingling with clinking glasses and music. I stood beside Michael, trying to steady the tremor in my chest, when Samantha took the microphone. Her voice rang clear and sharp, slicing through the joyous hum. "We always knew Sarah was the pretty one," she announced with a cruel smile. "But at least this one found someone." The implication was unmistakable. Michael, my husband, was somehow a consolation prize. Or worse, a joke. The room fell into shocked silence. Faces turned toward me, a mix of surprise and discomfort flashing in their eyes. My cheeks burned with humiliation so fierce it felt like my skin might catch fire. Sarah gave an awkward smile, avoiding my gaze as if embarrassed by her mother's words. I knew the truth behind the scenes. Sarah's wedding was mostly funded by me, nearly $35,000 in gifts and loans, money I had quietly provided while Samantha basked in the spotlight. Yet none of that was acknowledged. Instead, my presence was erased, my contributions invisible. Michael's quiet rage was palpable, but I saw that he held back for my sake, not wanting to escalate the spectacle. I forced a fragile smile, swallowing the ache that clawed at my throat. Beneath that smile, a seed of rebellion took root, silent but fierce. In the days that followed, desperation gripped me. I summoned the courage for one last sincere conversation with Samantha, hoping to break through the wall she built around herself. "I need respect and acknowledgement," I said quietly. "This family can't keep tearing me down." I offered to rebuild, to sit down and find common ground, even set clear boundaries this time. But Samantha's response was cold, final. She dismissed me as petty and bitter, her voice mocking. "I've done more for you than you'll ever understand," she sneered, the words stabbing deeper than any knife. That was the moment I saw clearly. This wasn't about love or family. It was about control, domination. The line had been crossed, and the door to peaceful reconciliation slammed shut. I stood there, hurt and stunned. But beneath the pain, something fierce began to kindle. The fight was far from over. The aftermath hit me like a freight train barreling through every fragile hope I'd clung to. Samantha didn't just dismiss my failed attempt at asserting myself. She weaponized it, painting me as the unreasonable, dramatic daughter who couldn't handle the truth. At the next family gathering, her voice carried like a whip crack, echoing through the room. Skylar's always been the difficult one, expecting the world to bend to her will. The words stung, but worse was the chorus of nods and murmurs from relatives who had once been warm, but now stood firmly in Samantha's camp. Even the casual family friends I'd considered allies began to distance themselves, their faces polite but guarded, eyes avoiding mine, as if my presence unsettled them. The isolation was suffocating. I sat alone in the corner of the living room during holiday dinners, the clinking of glasses and laughter turning into a distant, mocking soundtrack. I felt like a ghost among the living, unseen and unheard, my value dismissed as if I were an inconvenient shadow to be ignored. Self-doubt gnawed at me relentlessly. Was I really imagining the abuse? Was I just too sensitive, too needy, too weak to handle the truth of who I was in this family? The whispers, the sidelong glances, the pointed silences, they all converged into a crushing weight that pressed down on my chest. I craved validation, a kind word, a hint that someone, anyone, saw me for who I truly was beneath the layers of manipulation. Michael remained my refuge, the one solid anchor in a sea of shifting tides. But even his unwavering support felt like a fragile raft in an ocean of despair. His quiet reassurances, "You're not alone, Sky," echoed in my ears. But inside, I was drowning. I wanted to scream, to break free from the chains of invisibility, But the humiliation wrapped around me like a shroud, muting my voice and sapping my strength. The frustration of being erased despite years of sacrifice twisted inside me, sharp and relentless. Yet, beneath the despair, a flicker of something new stirred, a seed of defiance, fragile but stubborn. I refused to be the scapegoat anymore. Even if the world turned its back, I would find a way to stand tall. This was rock bottom, but it was also the ground where my resolve began to take root. The local high school gymnasium buzzed with pride and excitement as parents and students filled the bleachers for the graduation ceremony. I sat in the crowd, my heart swelling with quiet pride as my daughter Emma took the stage to accept her honors. This moment was supposed to be ours, a celebration of her hard work and promise. But then, cutting through the applause came Samantha's voice, sharp and venomous, carrying like a knife through the air. We all know Sarah could have made it here with her looks. But Skylar, well, she's always been the awkward one. The words weren't just cruel. They were broadcast live, witnessed by school officials, parents, and students alike. Emma's face flushed crimson as she looked down, embarrassed by her grandmother's spite. My chest tightened, pain erupting like a wildfire inside me. For a moment, I was frozen, heart shattered, dignity scorched by the public humiliation. But beneath the shock, something inside me snapped. Years of silent sacrifice, of bending and breaking under Samantha's relentless control, exploded into a burning rage. This wasn't mere family dysfunction anymore. It was deliberate, a calculated pattern designed to keep me powerless, invisible, and humiliated. The stunned silence that followed felt suffocating, but I clenched my fists beneath the heavy weight of betrayal. Turning to Michael, my voice barely a whisper, I said, "Not this time. I'm done being invisible." In that moment, a cold clarity washed over me, a fierce determination to reclaim my voice and my dignity. I was no longer the awkward, overlooked daughter. I was a woman who had been pushed to the edge and found strength in the fracture. The crowd's eyes were on me, the atmosphere thick with tension. I stood taller, swallowing the lump in my throat, stepping into a new identity, not the family scapegoat, but a woman ready to fight back. The pain lingered, raw and jagged, but so did the fire. This was the beginning of something different. I could feel it coursing through my veins, a promise that I wouldn't disappear into the shadows again. That night, alone in the quiet sanctuary of our bedroom, I lay awake, the echoes of Samantha's words still ringing in my ears. The house was dark, but the weight of years of sacrifice and rejection pressed down on me like never before. I pulled out my laptop and began sifting through the files I'd painstakingly collected over the years. Emails, bank statements, photos, detailed spreadsheets chronicling every loan, every gift, every unacknowledged favor. Each document was a testament to a lifetime of invisible labor, a silent ledger of my unyielding commitment to a family that refused to see me. Anger simmered beneath the surface, fueled by the raw pain of being erased and exploited. I traced the lines of transactions where I'd sent tens of thousands to cover Sarah's tuition, her rent, her luxuries, money that had left my account with no recognition or gratitude in return. I saw the patterns clearly now: Samantha's manipulation, Sarah's obliviousness, and the family's enabling silence. It wasn't random cruelty. It was a finely tuned machine designed to keep me small and silent. As I stared at the numbers and words, sorrow twisted into fierce determination. The tears I shed were not just for the past, but for the future I refused to accept. No more silence, I whispered to the empty room. No more accepting crumbs when I've given everything. The pain was raw, but so was my power. I was awakening to the truth of my worth, and I would never let it be stolen again. The morning light filtered through the curtains as I sat across from Michael at the kitchen table, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. I shared my plan, my voice steady but fierce. I'm going to expose this. Everything. Samantha's cruelty, the favoritism, the financial exploitation. It has to be clear and proportional. No name-calling or petty accusations, just facts and evidence. Michael nodded thoughtfully, his pragmatic mind already turning over the strategy. Timing will be everything. he said. "We need witnesses and emotions high. Somewhere public, where it can't be swept under the rug." Sarah's upcoming graduation could be the moment. Together, we began mapping out the plan, outlining how to gather and present the documentation I'd accumulated over the years. I started drafting speeches, rehearsing my words carefully to balance truth with dignity. Michael's steady presence was a balm to my swirling emotions, turning my raw pain into calculated action. This was no longer about reaction or hurt. It was about reclaiming control. The shift was profound. From the depths of isolation and humiliation, I was rising, no longer the family's silent victim, but a woman armed with truth and resolve. The road ahead was daunting, but for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope, a chance to rewrite the story on my own terms. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of papers and glowing laptop screens, each document a thread in the tangled web of my family's dependence on me. The numbers were staggering. Over the years, I'd quietly funneled more than $150,000 into their lives. Sarah's college tuition alone accounted for a significant chunk, an unspoken truth hidden beneath the family's polished surface. It struck me that none of these gifts had ever been officially acknowledged or recorded as such. There were no thank you notes, no recognition, just an assumption that I would always be the bank and emotional crutch. My lawyer had been clear. This wasn't just about money, it was leverage, but it had to be wielded carefully. Revealing too much too soon could backfire legally or socially, but the fact that I held this secret power was intoxicating. The lawyer also pointed out Samantha's subtle but critical reliance on me. She thrived on my reputation, my social connections, and my steady presence that made her appear like the benevolent matriarch. In truth, without me shouldering the family's hidden debts and smoothing over their emotional ruptures, Samantha's carefully constructed image would crumble. That was a vulnerability few noticed because I was so good at hiding the burden. Mapping it all out, I realized the illusion of control wasn't on Samantha's side. It was in mine. The family's facade was brittle, and I held the key to shatter it. As I traced the logistics of Sarah's tuition payments, the unrecorded loans, and the emotional labor that underpinned every family gathering, a quiet, fierce clarity settled inside me. For the first time, I understood the depth of my own power, hidden beneath years of sacrifice. I also saw the cracks in their armor, Samantha's fear of exposure, the way she guarded her social standing with veiled threats and guilt. Her manipulations depended on my silence, my patience, and my invisibility. But I wasn't invisible anymore. With the lawyer's guidance, I crafted a mental map of the battle ahead: timing, precision, and restraint. I couldn't afford reckless moves. This had to be a chess match, not a wildfire. I reviewed my financial records again, noting every loan and gift, every email where Samantha begged for help or subtly demanded more. I looked at photos from family events where Samantha's favoritism was blatant, Sarah sparkling in the spotlight, me shrinking into the background, my name never spoken in praise. These moments, once just painful memories, now felt like evidence waiting to be wielded. That evening, as I closed my laptop, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and invigoration. The invisible chains that bound me were real, but so was the path to breaking free. I was no longer just the family's silent supporter. I was someone who understood the architecture of their dependence on me. And with that knowledge came a fierce hope, the possibility that I could finally reclaim my dignity and demand the respect I deserved. The family's illusion was fragile, and I had the power to undo it. The question was not if, but when. I whispered to myself, they don't know what's coming. And for the first time in years, the weight on my chest felt lighter, like a storm gathering, ready to break. The weeks leading up to Sarah's graduation were a careful dance of secrecy and preparation. I moved quietly through my days, planting seeds without arousing suspicion. Gaining access to the event program was my first victory. I arranged to speak after Samantha's expected remarks, ensuring the spotlight would shift, even if only briefly, to the truth beneath the polished smiles. I compiled a folder of photographs, each image a stark contrast between Samantha's public praise and private cruelty, moments frozen in time where favoritism was unmistakable, where I was deliberately sidelined. These photos weren't just evidence. They were a visual record of years spent fighting for recognition that never came. On social media, I updated my profiles with subtle hints of my own accomplishments, posts about workshops I led, heartfelt congratulations from colleagues, quiet celebrations of milestones. Nothing overt, just enough to whisper that I was more than the family's scapegoat. Michael and I rehearsed my speech late into the nights. I practiced keeping my voice calm and measured, my words sharp but dignified. Every phrase was crafted to pierce the veneer without shattering it completely. I wanted to wake the family, not destroy them. The facade I maintained around them was a mask I wore flawlessly, smiling at family dinners, engaging in small talk, appearing the dutiful daughter and sister. No one suspected that behind that mask, I was preparing to expose the truth. The family remained blissfully unaware of my plans. Samantha continued her usual routine of demanding attention and adoration, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Sarah floated through her days, radiating confidence and entitlement, still unaware of the debts I had silently covered. Even my father, passive as ever, seemed untouched by the shifting tides. I felt the tension building inside me, a coil tightening with every passing day. It was a delicate balance, preparing for the moment when the truth would be laid bare, while keeping up appearances to avoid premature suspicion. I reminded myself to breathe, to stay composed. This was my quiet rebellion, my reclaiming of power, and I vowed to see it through without losing myself in anger or bitterness. Then, almost by accident, I found it. Sorting through a box of old papers my father had left behind, something thick and folded caught my eye. A letter in his familiar, steady handwriting. My heart pounded as I unfolded it, revealing a handwritten will that changed everything. My father had intended to divide the estate equally between Sarah and me, with explicit instructions for Samantha to treat me fairly and acknowledge my contributions. The letter was a direct contradiction to Samantha's public narrative of favoritism and control. It was as if my father had foreseen the manipulation and sought to protect me, even from beyond the grave. My hands trembled as I read his words that validated my sacrifices and exposed Samantha's betrayal. I hurried to show Michael, my voice barely above a whisper as I shared the discovery. We both understood the magnitude of this find. If the estate was ever handled publicly, Samantha's carefully maintained control over the family's story would unravel completely. The letter revealed her deepest fear, the loss of dominance, and the exposure of her lies. It wasn't just legal proof, it was a moral vindication. I felt a surge of power I hadn't known I possessed. "This changes everything," I said quietly, a small, fierce smile breaking across my face. For the first time, I held undeniable evidence of the truth, a shield against Samantha's manipulation that no amount of guilt or gaslighting could erode. That night, the letter tucked safely away, I lay awake with a new resolve. The path ahead was clearer, the stakes higher, but I was no longer walking blindly. I was armed with the knowledge that my father had seen me, had fought for fairness in a way Samantha tried to erase. It was a turning point, a moment when the scales began to tip. Michael's calm presence beside me was a reminder that I wasn't alone. Together, we would navigate the coming storm. I closed my eyes and whispered to the darkness, "It's time." The quiet rebellion was no longer just a whisper, it was a promise. At Sarah's graduation, the air buzzed with the usual excitement, but beneath the surface, I was already shifting the ground beneath their feet. I had made the decision to start pulling back, subtly but decisively, from the financial and emotional support the family had long taken for granted. I contacted the college administration, informing them of the true source of Sarah's tuition payments and requesting official recognition for my contributions. It was a small act on the surface, but monumental underneath. At the same time, I blocked Samantha from managing the family's social media pages, cutting off her ability to control the narrative that had always favored her version of events. I spoke quietly with a few mutual friends, gently revealing the reality behind the family's polished facade, the years of unacknowledged loans, the emotional labor I'd shouldered alone. It was subtle, the kind of information that spreads like a ripple, seeping into conversations and planting seeds of doubt. I watched as Samantha's credibility began to crack, small whispers turning into uneasy glances at family gatherings. She was confused, unable to piece together what was happening. To her, it must have seemed like random family drama, a series of unfortunate coincidences, but I knew better. This was the first phase of a long game, a calculated dismantling of the power she'd held for so long. Throughout it all, I kept my composure, calm, strategic, composed. I refused to let anger dictate my actions. I saw the subtle shifts in Samantha's posture, the way her eyes flickered with uncertainty when she thought no one was looking. The cracks in her facade were beginning to show, but she hadn't yet connected the dots. She still believed she was in control. I felt a quiet satisfaction as the first consequences unfolded, knowing that the real reckoning was yet to come. For the first time in years, I wasn't the invisible daughter, the silent victim. I was the woman quietly rewriting the rules, setting boundaries for the first time. And as the evening wore on, I felt the weight of years lift ever so slightly. The fight had begun, and this time, I was ready. The auditorium buzzed with the usual chatter and clinking of glass, the air thick with anticipation as the family gathered to celebrate Sarah's graduation. Samantha, radiant in a perfectly tailored dress, stood at the podium, commanding attention with practiced ease. Her voice dripped with patronizing pride as she spoke, dismissing my contributions with a casual wave of her hand, painting me as the dutiful daughter who did what she could, but never quite measuring up to Sarah's brilliance. I felt the familiar sting of invisibility. The years of sacrifice boiled down to a footnote in her speech, but this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. When Samantha finished, the room erupted in applause, but I stood up before anyone else could speak. The hush was immediate, eyes turning toward me, curiosity and surprise mingling in the air. "Speaking of family," I began, my voice calm but unwavering, "there's something I need to share." With a click, the projector flared to life, illuminating the wall behind me with a slideshow of photographs, moments frozen in time where Samantha's favoritism was undeniable. Sarah basking in the spotlight, Samantha's arms wrapped tightly around her, while I stood at the edges, overlooked and minimized. Next came the financial records, carefully documented transfers, emails and statements, proof of the over $150,000 I had quietly funneled into the family, covering Sarah's tuition, rent, and luxuries. The evidence was irrefutable. Then, the final bombshell, the faded letter from Dad, his handwriting clear and intentional, instructing equal treatment and acknowledgement of my contributions. The room fell silent, the weight of truth pressing down on every face. Samantha's complexion drained, her mouth opening and closing without sound, unable to muster a response. "For years," I said, meeting eyes with each family member, "I was made invisible, humiliated, and used. Today, I reclaim my voice." The gasp that rippled through the crowd was electric. Friends whispering, school officials exchanging stunned glances. Sarah's eyes avoided mine. The betrayal was written across her face. I pressed on, steady and resolute. "I am no longer the family ATM or scapegoat. I demand respect and honesty." The moment crystallized, a shift so profound it felt like the ground beneath us had realigned. I wasn't just speaking. I was taking back everything they'd tried to steal. The room's atmosphere transformed from celebration to reckoning. I saw the flickers of doubt in their eyes, the cracks starting to show. Standing there, bathed in the glow of the projector and the weight of truth, I finally felt the surge of power that had been buried beneath years of sacrifice. This was my moment, the champagne moment, when invisibility shattered and dignity soared. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready to be seen. In the days that followed, Samantha's carefully curated world began to collapse like a house of cards. Family members who had once sided with her now approached me privately, their faces etched with conflicted disbelief. "Skylar, is it true?" one whispered, eyes wide. Others more blunt, demanding explanations from Samantha, who fumbled for answers, her usual confidence shattered. The social circles that had once surrounded her like a protective shield started to dissipate. Friends who had kept their distance began to steer clear altogether, their whispers echoing the truth I had laid bare. Desperate, Samantha dialed my number several times, each call a different tactic, a tearful apology, a shower of compliments, promises to change, but I remained firm, screening her attempts with cold detachment. Michael supported me quietly from the sidelines, his presence a steady anchor amid the storm. The school officials, once distant observers, reached out with words of commendation, praising my courage and integrity. I learned that some local media had picked up the story quietly, a ripple of awareness spreading through the community, turning the tide against Samantha's reign. Despite the chaos, I was cautious not to let triumph blind me. The fight wasn't over. Samantha's desperation made her dangerous, but as I watched her isolation deepen, her influence slipping through her fingers like sand, a quiet vindication filled me. I had dismantled the facade, exposed the exploitation, and reclaimed my voice in the public eye. Yet beneath the satisfaction, a wary vigilance settled. This was only the beginning of a new chapter, one I intended to write on my own terms. Samantha's response to her unraveling was swift and relentless. She mobilized her allies, extended family members, and old friends who had once been loyal enforcers of her will. These flying monkeys bombarded me with veiled threats, insinuations about my character, and emotional blackmail designed to break my resolve. There were whispers planted at my workplace, subtle rumors questioning my professionalism and integrity, attempts to isolate me socially and professionally. I could feel the pressure mounting, but this time, I was prepared. Michael and I meticulously documented every interaction, texts, emails, phone calls, building a record that would protect me from her manipulations. I refused to engage emotionally, knowing that any reaction would feed her game. My composure became my shield. Calm and unyielding, I deflected her tactics with quiet strength. Samantha's attempts to draw me back into the toxic cycle fell flat, her words echoing hollowly against the fortress of my resolve. As her manipulations faltered, Samantha's isolation grew more apparent. The social veneer she had maintained cracked further, revealing vulnerability beneath the narcissistic facade. Her allies wavered, unsure whether to stick with a woman losing power or to distance themselves for their own sake. The very weapons she wielded to control me, guilt, fear, loyalty, had turned against her. In this shifting landscape, I stood firm, no longer the broken daughter, but the woman who had survived and reclaimed her life. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, I found a peace I hadn't known in years. The weight of invisibility lifted, replaced by a newfound dignity that felt almost foreign but deeply right. Michael and I grew closer, our bond forged in the fire of conflict, built on trust, respect, and shared strength. The family dynamic shifted subtly but unmistakably. Where once I had been the scapegoat, now I was an equal, a force of quiet authority that could no longer be ignored. Samantha retreated into the shadows, her influence diminished, her power fractured. As I reflected on the journey, I realized that my voice had not been reclaimed through anger or vengeance, but by shining a steady light on truth. That light illuminated not only the wounds, but also the possibility of healing. I embraced the future with hope, a future where self-worth was no longer tied to sacrifice or silence. At my daughter's next milestone, a small but heartfelt celebration surrounded by genuine support, I felt the fullness of freedom. The laughter, the warmth, the authenticity, all the things I had denied myself for so long, were finally mine. I knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but now I walked it with eyes wide open and heart steady. The chains of the past were broken, replaced by the quiet power of self-respect and boundaries firmly drawn. In that moment, surrounded by those who truly cared, I whispered a promise to myself. I would never again lose sight of my worth. The story had changed, and so had I. Stronger, wiser, and finally free.